Namaste, everyone. I have the honor of one more conversation. We've had several before with Dr. Tony Nader. He's the head of the Maharishi organization. A brief introduction, and then I'll welcome him and let him tell us about his wonderful new book. Dr. Nader trained at Harvard University and MIT, got an MD and a PhD, specializing in brain science. So he's a brain scientist and cognitive science. So that's the right background for this, for developing a philosophy of consciousness, which is what he's been doing. And Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, whom I'm very fond of and very indebted to, and I will get into that in a moment, appointed him as his successor before he died. And so, Dr. Nader, with this brief background and a brief introduction to you, welcome to the show one more time.
Thank you. Always a joy to be with you, Rajiv. This is wonderful. You can call me Tony also. It's fine.
Yes, of course. So I want people to know that Dr. Nader has a new book. Consciousness is all there is. That's a very interesting title. Many of you would say, yeah, that is true. But he has a lot of interesting things to talk about. It's based on Vedanta. It's based on Maharishi's training, Maharishi's knowledge. It's based on Dr. Nader's own scientific background. And so he's taken Vedanta and put it in a very scientific context. And am I right in
Absolutely
saying that,
right. Yes.
Am I right in saying that your book is, it's not philosophy and it's not science, but it's the philosophy of science?
It is science and philosophy in the sense because it answers many philosophical questions about life and living and all that. And it's scientific because we can find systems and empirical systems that actually, support the idea that consciousness is primary.
So I would recommend everyone to get a copy of this book. And in this broadcast underneath, there'll be some information on where you can buy it from. It's available worldwide. Some of the questions that the book answers are as follows. Does the brain create consciousness, which is what the materialists say? So he answers that. Are the brain and the mind two distinct substances, or perhaps different properties of the same one fundamental thing? Okay, that's very interesting. Does consciousness survive the brain? So when the brain is dead, what happens to consciousness? Does everything have consciousness? And that's an interesting question. Will robots eventually be conscious? Now, each one of them is a very provocative question. And just, defining the question you want to talk about is a large part of the contribution of any innovative thinker. And these are very innovative questions. So he says, our physical world of matter and energy is best understood as consciousness interacting with itself. So it's consciousness interacting with itself. Okay. And then how does he come up with all his conclusions? I will just make one statement. He says, it's a quote, and then turn over to him. He says, any comprehensive and fruitful investigation of consciousness has to have empirical data, must necessarily include consistent subjective experiences, such as reliable and repeatable experiences gained during meditation. Now, this is very profound. All this is very exciting. But I want to ask you right away, how is my meditative experience verifiable by you and vice versa? This is a question that often comes across people who are materialists and want to not acknowledge the empiricism of what we would call first-person empiricism of subjective experience. Will say, how do we know that anyone is claiming the truth when they say, I've had this experience?
Well, there are two levels of the effect of meditation that we can measure and understand. One is subjective and one is on the physical level, kind of objective. Subjective means I cannot see it as an observer, but you experience it. So what happens during your meditation? Do you feel better? Do you feel peaceful? Do you feel calm? Do you feel harmonious with yourself? Do you feel expanded? Do you come out inspired? Is your clarity of mind bigger? You can solve problem easier. All of these are subjective experiences. Solving problem easier has an objective value also, because you can put somebody to test and see that actually they behave better, actually they are faster reaction time, actually they solve more problems and have better concentration and better memory. There are measures that measure these aspects of the mind, and therefore all of these experiences are for real. Because even in science, in medicine, in neurology, you have a system to analyze what people are feeling. So you ask them questions. There is what is called the DSM in psychiatry and all that, which analyzes people through asking them questions. So that's why subjective questions, subjective experiences that are related by the subject are also important. We cannot ignore them. And that's why you beautifully picked up that quote, which says, we cannot just say if somebody feels happy, we say, oh, this is subjective. How do we know that it's true? Well, he's happy or she's happy. And that's what, they experience. And that's part of life, part of living. After all, we live life through our consciousness. We live life through how we experience things, how subjectively they influence us. Are we happy? Are we fulfilled? Are we peaceful? Are we angry? Are we depressed? Are we feeling pain? All of these are happening in the field of consciousness, because without consciousness, you don't feel pain, you don't feel happiness, you don't feel anything, you don't have knowledge. So this is one level which is very significant and very important, and we cannot ignore. The other level is actually the other aspects of consciousness, which appear to us as physical, and that is our body, our neurons, our brain wave activity, the electricity in the brain, the electroencephalogram, the hormones, the metabolites in the body, the temperature of the body, the skin resistance, the heart rate, the blood pressure. All of these are very objective, if you like to call them this way, objective measures that we can measure through a machine. And we see that when you meditate, how they change. Do they change in the right direction? Are your heart rate slower? Is your breathing more soft, more calm? Is your blood pressure improved? Do you have less or more cortisol in your body, which indicates how stressed you are? Is the brain working in an integrated way, in a holistic way, or is it chaotic, which can tell this through analysis of brain waves? So there are these two values, and they are empirical in a sense. Even the subjective value, when you look at it and repeat it over many, many individuals, then it becomes systematic and reliable.
Good. This is perfect. So I cannot have your experience that you're having, but the effects of your experience I can measure.
Exactly.
So this is why it's reproducible. But this is a common argument. This is an argument I've had for decades with people who are skeptical, that look, when you say that you cannot really test somebody else's meditative experience, the point is you can measure the effects of that experience. Now, there's two kinds of effects, as you said. One is the clinical effects, which is physical. We can measure in a functional MRI what happened to his brain, where the brain got activated, what happened to all his other parameters, to his neurological system. And then there's a subjective effects where he says, I'm happy. Now, that's subjective. But suppose, so first of all, if any large sample of regular people are questioned, what is your state of feeling? What are you feeling? And it's correlated with what the brain scan shows, then you can say that this particular measure in the brain scan corresponds to people's subjective experience, that same subjective, because all of them said that, right? If all of them say when I'm right now I'm happy, or right now I'm whatever, if thousands of people say that, and you measure exactly what the brain scan shows at that time, then you have a physical correlate of that. And so then if somebody meditates, a lot of people meditate, they do transcendental meditation, and all of them produce that same effect, which has been proven to be coinciding with happiness, then you can say it causes happiness. I mean, is that a good argument?
Absolutely. It's exactly like that.
So I'm just now, as I was speaking, I'm reminded of an anecdote I want to tell our people. About 20 years ago, I was giving a talk at the India's elite scientific establishment. It's the Atomic Energy Commission. It's near Mumbai, and that's where all the atomic reactors and the nuclear scientists and all these heavy physicists, they work there. So I was invited to give a talk on Indian knowledge systems to a group of scientists, physicists. And so I presented some of these things about the first person empiricism. I discussed about the first person empiricism, which is what we're now talking about. And during Q&A, I was asked the question, how do we know all these claims you are making about the rishis are true? How do we as scientists, how can we be expected to believe because there's no evidence? We cannot see what the rishis saw. So here is what I said to them, which was quite provocative, but I want you to know. So I told them, you know, none of you have ever seen an electron. None of you have ever seen an electron. What you've seen is the effect of an electron on a photographic plate. So in a bubble chamber, you have what you think is a beam of electrons because you've done all the things. And if these are electrons, they'll move in a certain velocity, in a certain direction, and they'll make a certain mark on a photographic plate. And when you change the field, the electrical field, then these electrons move differently. So every time, assuming the hypothesis that there exists an electron, and that this electron has certain properties, you can manipulate its behavior and it will have an effect on a photographic plate. So no scientist has ever seen an electron, and I don't think you ever will, but you see the effect that an electron produces. And that is how you believe. Everybody believes there are electrons, but nobody has ever seen one. Now, it is actually a commonsensical thing that I said, but these guys never thought of that. And I mean, it's like it's an amazing thing for them to hear somebody out of nowhere come in and say, hey, you guys never saw an electron. And without that, you cannot do any of your jobs. So the point is this. I think it's a philosophical point that there exist things, according to our philosophy, that we cannot through our senses see directly, but they produce an effect. Is that a fair statement? I mean, things like...
Absolutely.
I mean, you could apply this to things like pran. A pran has an effect on many, many levels. But, you know, I'm not going to go see the pran itself. So this is true of many things in our philosophy.
Absolutely. And, you know, when they looked deeper into what an electron was, because at the beginning we used to think an electron is like a billiard ball of a certain small size going around the nucleus. But when the scientists look deeper into nature, the electron turns out to be more like a cloud. It's just a potentiality. And if you looked even deeper than that, it's a probability of being here, being there, being this. If it is observed or not observed, it will be looking like a wave, or suddenly it will look like a particle. And these are very real scientific experiments where you can see the effect of an electron, as you're saying, but you can also see that the electron has probabilities, and it can be in many different places at the same time. So if we were to project this idea by itself, it sounds crazy, because how can something be at different places at the same time? But when the reality shows, the mathematics shows, the logic shows that this is the case, then you say, well, it makes sense. And what makes sense, even when people talk now about multiverse and all of this, we don't need to go there, but you know, the scientists have this fertile imagination. They've never seen another universe, but they assume it's there because the calculation and the mathematics shows how to solve certain problems in terms of collapse of the wave function, etc. No need to complicate that, but just to say, when something has an explanatory power, which means it explains phenomena that you are observing, and it does not contradict what are the actual findings that you have, then you can be sure or more sure you are on the right track. So there is the effect of things that we don't see, and then there is the theory about it and how it works. And if the theory explains the phenomena and many, many phenomena, then you are on the right track. So when we are considering consciousness, for example, and we say, well, how can you study consciousness? There is no way to study consciousness directly. You can't put it on a scale. You can't, look at it. You can't smell it. But if you study consciousness, which is what we are actually most familiar with, it's our awareness, our consciousness. We live our lives through consciousness, because without consciousness, we are nothing. If you are in deep anesthesia or in coma, what does it matter to you to be the richest man, or the person, the most loved woman, or the healthiest person on earth? It doesn't matter. So what matters is consciousness. And then we look at consciousness in a very profound way and see what theory allows us to explain all the phenomena of life and living and freedom and determinism and meaning of life, which are the important questions in life, and what explains them. And if there is an explanatory power for all of these phenomena that puts everything together in the simplest possible way, then you can say, well, I feel like I'm on the truth. I am on the path of truth.
No, that's very profound. So basically, if you postulate something, and it is as an assumption, it leads to valid conclusions, then you say, well, this is a valid assumption. And the moment it does not, it leads to conclusions that are contradictory, then you reject it and you believe in, start with something else. I mean, that is how science works. Everything starts with some axioms, and those axioms are valid as long as the conclusions reached are valid. So that's how it is. I mean, another very profound example that stuns people when you tell them is that most of calculus and most of quantum physics and most of mathematics, modern mathematics, would be impossible without something which is written as small I. That means square root of -1. Now, the square root of -1, you don't find it anywhere. I mean, common sense says meaningless. What do you mean, square root of -1? I mean, if it means that there's something which multiplied by itself gives you this thing, which is useless. It doesn't make sense to a mathematician, but it's an axiom. It's a construct. It's an imaginary number. It's called an imaginary number for a reason, because you cannot physically find such a quantity in this world. And yet it's so useful that without this, if you eliminate the square root of -1, the small I, very little calculus and very little advanced mathematics would survive. I mean, so I think science, mathematics, physical sciences, etc., are full of examples where something is not within our sensory world. So I think we also have to have the humility to say that maybe our sensory world is not complete, and in some ways it's not informing us accurately. Would you say?
More than just that, actually, we have the proof that our sensory systems are incomplete. It's actually proven. For example, we know that we can see only from red to violet. We cannot see infrared. We cannot see ultraviolet. Now we extend our senses through machines so that now we can see the infrared, we can experience X-ray, we can maybe test the gamma rays and all of that. But our physical sensory experience is very limited. You wake up in the morning, you see sun coming from east to west. You say, well, that's how it works. The sun moves in the sky. So based on the sensory experience for thousands of years, the West and modern people were believing or thinking that it's the sun moving in the sky and the earth is flat and is right there. And so when they analyze things beyond this limited sensory experience, they found that it's the earth rotating around its axis. And the sun is actually stable with respect to the solar system. And the solar system revolves around it, and the earth is round. And, when we look deeper into things, the things that are looking most solid as reference, such as space and time, when you really analyze them, you find that they are relative to the speed at which you are going. So if you fly very fast, little space, the real space actually contracts and time dilates and stops. And so if you analyze these things, you think, oh, this is imagination. It's impossible to really say that it is true, but it is very true. Actually, if we don't adjust for that, the change of time and space, then none of our satellites will be giving us correct references and correct positions, because they are at a distance from us, and the space and time for them is different than it is for us. And so scientists have to adjust that from time to time. And so, yes, of course, we have the proof that our senses are limited.
Very good, very good. Now, one of the things that you mentioned here is that there are 4 higher states of consciousness that you describe, and to know this is not a matter of direct observation of these 4, but if you are in the highest state of consciousness, you directly know. So the idea is that you transcend the ordinary state of consciousness we are all in, and you from a higher state you begin to understand. Now, I wanted to explain one of the other projects I'm working on is with a lady in India who's an expert in Sri Vidya, and so I just finished writing a book on Sri Aurobindo, which is coming out in 2 weeks in Delhi.
Ah, beautiful.
Yeah, it's called the Battle for Consciousness Theory. It's also about his theory of consciousness and some other people who are appropriating it and mischaracterizing it, and I'm talking about that battle. So this person in India, who I've known for a long time, is a Sri Vidya scholar. And so she mentioned to me that there are very direct parallels between Sri Vidya states of consciousness and what Sri Aurobindo describes as states of consciousness. So we are going to do a project to do a comparative study of Sri Vidya and Sri Aurobindo, because both are large communities, and maybe there'll be something useful to show the correlation. Now, has there been a study of Maharishi's explanation of higher states of consciousness and how it correlates with Sri Vidya, for example? And that would be something interesting.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. I'd like to look more at what that particular expert in Sri Vidya actually teaches or expresses, which I must say I'm not familiar. I know what Sri Vidya is, but I don't know that particular, look at it or interpretation of it or practice of it. And so then I will see how it compares, and we can compare. Of course, that would be very interesting to do. From Maharishi's teaching and what we have experienced through him, there is a logical development of how the experience of the self grows from the small self to be transcending it itself and going to the ocean of consciousness. Because in the Advaita Vedantic vision, as Maharishi was propagating, as Sri Aurobindo, of course, and all the great seekers and leaders in this field have said that there is an ocean of consciousness, which is the self of everything and everyone. But when we are living in our limited perspective of ourself, we think we are only that body, that mind. We are only the limited perspective of my soul as an individual, my ahamkar, which my ego, myself. But in India, there is more than the ahamkar as a small self. There is the atma as the bigger self, which is pure consciousness. And that atma, that self, is the self of everything and everyone. And we don't know it in a normal day-to-day living. We feel we are just that small individual. When you transcend, and that's why we say transcendental meditation, and we use it, you go beyond the surface waves of that ocean, and you go to the ocean itself and know that you are the ocean. So you experience that during transcending, but then when you open the eyes and you go into activity, this experience kind of goes away. But as you continue to transcend, go to the ocean and come back, this knowledge and experience of the self remains with you. And that's what we call liberation or moksha, which means you have been freed from the boundaries of the object. Because usually when you look at the object, it takes over your consciousness. You look at the flower, you kind of become the flower. You forget yourself, you forget who you are, you forget your ocean of being. But when you are in a liberated state, that means you have gone beyond boundaries of anything. And you know yourself to be unbounded, to be infinite, to be the self of everything and everyone. And that's who you are. Yet you experience the object at the same time. So you have this dual experience. That is transcendental consciousness when you practice meditation. But when it becomes stabilized, this is what we call cosmic consciousness, or this is the fifth state of consciousness, where you are always free from the boundaries of observations. You are always established in the self. That's what Krishna tells Arjuna on the battlefield, Yogasta Kuru Karmani, established in the state of being, in the state of unity within yourself, then you act on the outside. Now, this develops to include, after all, after you develop cosmic consciousness, to include all the aspects of life that are around you in a gradual way, seeing the holistic value of nature and all possibilities there. That is what we call glorified state of cosmic consciousness. And then it grows to unity consciousness, which is a state where not only you are the ocean, but you see everything else as that same ocean. And it's not an intellectual just realization. It's a very specific experience where you really know and experience that everything is myself and I am everything. And that's what we call Brahmi Chetana, or unity consciousness, the consciousness of the highest level of unity value.
Do you believe in reincarnation as part of this?
Personally, yes. We don't, of course, I do, because it makes sense. It explains, it has an explanatory power, which is very profound. And it explains karmas, and it explains many other aspects. You know, when people ask me about reincarnation, I have been using a simple example, or it's a metaphor, of course. You know, if you buy a game like these video games where you fight in the video games, and you're starting the fight, but you don't know the game yet, of course you're going to be shot and you're going to die. So you start the game again, and now you learn something, and you play the game again, and this time you go further in the game. And then you die, and then again you try, and then again you try, until you master the game, and you are the master of the situation, and you have solved the whole thing. Now, what I say is, suppose somebody sells you a game where the first time you try it and you are killed during the game, you can't play the game anymore. I think nobody will buy the game. It doesn't make sense. So I don't think the creator would, or life will create a game for us, a lila, where when we die one time, we have learned something, and that's over, that's finished. So that's why I feel, of course it's a metaphor, but I feel it makes much more sense to explain, you know, when you come in the next life, what has been before is justifying what you have now to work with, because you've learned some things, and now you are gonna use that learning. And so if you've learned a lot, you can come and evolve and like that. If you have not learned a lot, you still have the opportunity to learn by, you know, changing this cloth, which is the body, and coming in a new cloth, which is a new body.
This is wonderful. So I do a similar analogy, but a different one. I use in artificial intelligence, machine learning is basically taking a whole lot of data, which is experience, and learning from that experience. So like, let's say there's a car that is learning to drive itself. You know, it has all these cameras and scanners and whatnot, and it makes mistakes. So it learns from them. It does something right. It learns to reinforces that. So now the parameters in the AI system are approaching a trillion parameters in some of these AI models, trillion parameters. So these are parameters that keep getting tweaked and modulated and modified based on the experience. And so as the computing power increases, and that's why NVIDIA shares are doing so well, because they all need to buy NVIDIA shares. So this machine learning keeps tweaking these parameters in order to advance its knowledge and become better. Now, there's something similar that happens to human learning, I suppose. So you as a brain scientist, do you feel that the neurons are sort of something similar to that? That, you know, when we behave, when we have experiences, good ones, bad ones, and we learn from experiences, does it modulate the neurons, or is it somewhere else? People say in your gut. I mean, some people say, you know, so where is the learning stored? That's one thing. And the other interesting question is, my body will die and be cremated. So if all the neurons are gone, and whatever if whatever I achieved, whatever I learned was part of those neurons, then it means it's all a waste because they burnt it. And so there has to be some scar, some trace, which is maybe in some kind of a cosmic cloud or somewhere. So when the body dies and is cremated, it's still out there. So what are your thoughts on how this whole mechanism works? I mean, your ideas.
My ideas are that it's not that these things are stored in the neuron. It is that the experience that we have modifies the way the neuron works in such a way that it reveals new ability to experience new values. So the way we can look at it is that there is an unbounded ocean of being that is pure consciousness. And that pure consciousness we can experience from different levels. It's like, suppose you have the ocean, and you have the entire ocean is the reality of being, and that ocean has waves. And suppose you go on the surface of the waves, and you can experience, let's say, your vision is so small and narrow that you can experience only one wave. Or it can be very, very much narrower that you can't even experience the wave. You experience only some molecules of water. It's just imagining, you know, a vision that is limited. You just put something like that around your eyes, and then you see only that much. And now you get a new experience, which actually what it does is opens up your hiding, the hiding that is there, and starts revealing more of the wave, and more of the wave, and more of the wave. And now you see the whole wave. And now it's even more experience, and hiding is unhiding and removing the hiding. And now you see more, and you see more, and you see more of the waves, and you see many waves, and you see a lot of the waves. And now you can even dive or look inside and dive into the ocean and see the entire ocean and know you are the ocean. So what is happening in the transformation of the system that we have, which is our nervous system, where actually we can say learning is revealed rather than is kind of added. In fact, it's a revelation. It's knowing rather than adding up actually things. But it is adding up, of course, if somebody says, well, I just told you something, you learned something, you had an experience, so it added up. What it did actually is open up the possibility of bigger vision. And therefore, it's the ability to see that improves. See not just with the eyes, but with the heart, with the feeling, with everything, with all the senses, but with also deeper than that, with the intellect, with the mind. I usually take an analogy for that also. We're talking about analogies. And that's the analogy of a radio. You know, those who are of our age, Rajiv, they remember the big radio with the buttons that you turn and all that. Maybe the new generation doesn't know that. They see it in the museum. But, you know, you could tune your radio on different frequencies, and we used to have radios that can only pick up short waves, or radios that can pick up long waves. And you can hear only that station which has long wave broadcasting. And so you tune your radio and you adjust the wave, and now you can hear that music which comes from a long wave broadcasting. And if your radio is more sophisticated, you can hear then the short waves. And if your radio is so sophisticated and it has a screen and it can pick up not only short wave and long wave, but can also pick up waves that produce images, because it's very sophisticated, it becomes a television, and it becomes a color television when it progresses. And then it can become 3D vision. You know, it's not that these things are produced by the machine. These things are in there, the atmosphere. That's why it's picked up. They are there, and the waves of the ocean of electromagnetic field. And only this machine is able now to pick up more and more and pick up more and more, because more and more is being able to be revealed from what is already available. So our nervous system is the same. It actually gets improved, yes. And when it improves, it sees more and it experiences more. And when all the different parts of the brain work together in a harmonious way, then the experience of reality is broadened. You're no more experiencing just the little wave. Now you can see all the waves, or you can see the whole ocean. And that is how the improvement happens. And it doesn't mean that it is itself creating the ocean. It's just allowing us to experience the ocean. This is beautifully described. I'm giving a long answer. In the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna teaching Arjuna to get enlightened, at the end, when Arjuna discovers everything and knows everything, he doesn't say, oh, I've learned so much, and now I can have built myself a big knowledge through what you said. He just goes back onto himself and he says, Smriti Labda. I regained my memory. This is very telling. I regained my memory, which means now I know who I was and what I am really, and I came back to my true self. And that is how I see the system working.
Profound. The awakening is not of any physical nature. It's a kind of a cognitive expansion. It's a kind of cognitive expansion. We see more, but it was already there.
Exactly.
Yeah. So now there are some interesting, there's a lot of interesting things that I should discuss with you. We'll have many more conversations. But, somebody has established that they trained mice, okay, in a maze, how to find food and all that. And there are trained mice that can find it quickly. And then there are untrained mice that cannot find it quickly, because the trained mice has been around many times the same place and figured out how you turn and find it. So then what they did is they transferred, I don't know how they did it physically, but they're claiming that they transferred the memory of these trained mice. How they did it, physically they did it, I don't know. But they transferred the memory of these mice to other mice and found that without training, they were already trained, which means that some physical representation of their learning happened in their memory. And then this had a physical transmission property. You could transmit it. What do you think of that as a form? What do you think of that learning in the human being as something that can be potentially captured and transferred and given to somebody else? Because if that were the case, then somebody could learn to be a mathematician without having to study, or somebody could learn to play chess by downloading some chess guy's brain or whatever is in his memory. Is that you think that makes any sense?
Yeah, it looks now a bit of fictional, in the sense that it's what is it that you will exactly transform, and how you would move one thing into the other, change the molecules, or enhance the brain, or something like that. And we know, that when people transcend, they simply transcend and they awaken within themselves deeper values of activity of the brain and that were not there before. And now we know that there is also what is called collective neuroscience, where we see that even without transmitting physically something, the fact that when you change your mind, or you think of something in a certain way, or you discuss a subject with somebody else, your brain start becoming more coherent together and they start functioning together. And so there is a transmission that can happen. And we have research that shows that actually when collection of people practice transcendental meditation together, they change the behavior in society, even of people who don't practice transcendental meditation, because there is something called collective consciousness. So to come back to the actual example, again, the metaphor or the examples, the help. So if you have a radio that can only detect certain frequencies of waves, and now you add to it a part that can detect another frequency, then now the radio can detect both frequencies. And so that is a natural process. The question is how we can do it in the brain. And I mean, in human brain, it's more complicated, but in animal brain, you know, they can mess around a little bit without much impunity.
What you explained is what, if I understand correctly, is called the Maharishi effect.
Right.
Where I remember some decades back it was done all over in the world, and I was very impressed. And I know that this was done and verified by independent authorities that crime rate and various things went down when a certain number of people in a city were collectively involved in achieving a higher state of consciousness. Because as you said, it not only affected each other, but it also affected the rest of society, even those who were not involved in meditating. So that's very interesting, the collective effect of our state of consciousness on society at large.
Yeah, Maharishi predicted that in the 70s because he knew that there is more than just individual consciousness, that collective consciousness is created by the consciousness of the individuals. So if some individuals are diving deep within themselves and settling down their own consciousness, then the collective consciousness is also settling down. And so they did these first studies in the 70s on what we call the 1% effect, but because Maharishi predicted it, it was called Maharishi effect. And then when Maharishi brought new technologies, which is not only to dive within and experience the ocean of consciousness, but to be able to think from that level, which means to create a wave on that field of the ocean. So from the depths of the ocean, you can create powerful wave of change. This is called the siddhis, as taught by Patanjali. The Patanjali Yoga Sutras are used in this program. And that is a specific way to activate the entire ocean and see the results outside. So when those practices are done, the square root of 1% is enough to create an effect. And so for the whole world, for example, all we need is 10,000 people to practice these advanced techniques at the same time, in the same place, and we can have effects. And this also has been studied scientifically. And as you said, the effects have been published in peer-reviewed journals because the statistics were amazing and so accurate. And it was even proactive study, which means it's not just retroactive trying to analyze what we did before, but we announced it, we planned it, we said this is what will happen. We asked the scientists to observe the changes and the trends that showed decrease in crime, decreased accidents of the roads, decreased hospital admission, decreased drug use and decreased rape, decreased violence in society, and many positive things that on the surface level appeal to be non-related. You know, why should accidents of the road, why should infant mortality, for example, decrease at the same time that crime is reduced? And so this is statistically very strong and shows the effect and power of consciousness on the individual and collective levels.
I think the collective effect is fascinating because in the Western world, all the social sciences have failed. social sciences trying to bring out world peace, trying to do this and that. And, if you look at it, the social sciences model is a false model, a fake model, or rather, I would say it's an incorrect model, because it's called a social contract among egos. So if you haven't transcended, if these are egos with normal greed and jealousy and accumulation and materialism and all the kleshas, all the defects that an ordinary ego has, and all you do is bring them together into a contract called laws and policing and top-down, heavy-handed enforcement to make a society, it fails, because you see the problems in society are not going away, and in some ways getting worse. So I would argue that what one needs is not these social sciences, but a whole new Vedic social sciences, where the first requirement is that the individual has to achieve a higher state of consciousness. You have to start with individuals, because as the individual becomes more conscious, their behavior collectively will be better. The crime rates, like you mentioned, it's not just crime rates and other things going down and many, many improvements, but instead of a social contract being the mechanism for improving society, meditation could also improve society far better. What are your thoughts on that kind of a thing? Because it totally contradicts the social contract model, which has been driving social sciences. And so social sciences have not paid attention to, the individual. The modeling says that it's a brain, it's a physical piece of hardware, and it behaves in a behavioral manner. And if it misbehaves, we'll punish it, and we'll give it incentives for good behavior. So it's sort of like you're training robots. And it hasn't really produced the kind of social solutions and breakthroughs that were expected. So how do you feel about that from a consciousness point of view? Consciousness as a new paradigm for social sciences.
What you said is actually the motivation for which I wrote this book.
Oh, good.
Because, okay. Because we have to change the paradigm of understanding what it is all about when we are here. If everything is physical and material, you can have different logics. It's like, okay, we have a social contract and we work together and that helps us. But if I can get rid of this person, I can get rid of these people, I can do that. That's okay. Everything is just material and like that. And then fine, if I can get away with it, it's fine. If I can get caught, it's a problem. But if I can get away with it, then, I move on. And so that's really based on an understanding of life and living and the meaning of existence and the meaning of why we are here, where we're going, that is based on a materialistic, if you like, not in a political or economic way, but on a materiality, I will call it, or physicality kind of understanding of who we are and what we are. Whereas the reality of life, the meaning of life, the meaning of how we bring happiness to our individual life, balance in society, and be able to live a harmonious life among each other, is much more supported by a paradigm that says that consciousness is primary, and that explains why we are here and how we can evolve in growth of consciousness. And that the ultimate purpose of life, the ultimate purpose of existence, is to understand that we are the ocean of being and everyone is part of ourselves. And this is where the ego, actually, the sense of self, expands to embrace everyone and everything else. And that is where you don't have that clash on the surface where isolation and individuality and differences lead to conflict and strain and problems and fear of the other. Because that's not the point of it. That's not the point of life. And so my whole thesis in the book, my whole presentation on the Advaita Vedanta that the book presents, correlates, it has an implication on the meaning of life and on the need and the reason why peace and harmony and happiness increase with greater unity and greater understanding of the true oneness at the basis of all diversity.
So this has been an amazing conversation. We're running out of time a little bit. So I wanted to find out from the hosts, are we able to take questions from the audience? So can we, so let's go through some questions. So somebody has asked a question: how will Neuralink, that is Elon Musk's brain implants, affect consciousness?
Yes, Annie, it will be more information at the beginning. So it's like when you are checking on a computer, doing a Google search or doing whatever to try to have information. If you have the data available through the direct experience, and you can access it from thought or the mind level, which is possible because the mind is reflected in certain electrical activities in the brain, then it will increase your access to information, and therefore your ability to make decisions and understanding. You will look more valuable and more knowledgeable. But your consciousness will not be affected, except if it's done in an improper way. What you need is to activate your basic physiological structure that is built to transcend, and that compromising that will or can potentially have a negative effect. But if it's just the storage of information and ability to access information and ability to facilitate communication in the brain, then it can have a very positive effect. I think we had with Rajiv Ji the discussion before. He asked me a similar question many times before when
Right.
we had the discussion. Yeah,
Right.
and I said I think similar things.
Yeah, I think the person who's asking the question is also wanting to know, can this be misused, as you said? So can an Elon Musk have so much knowledge about what you're doing, what you're thinking, what I'm doing, and all our private thoughts and so on, that by pushing buttons he can control people? And that's the danger, I think, of technologies like Neuralink and many others. I mean, the US government is developing it, the Chinese government is developing it. Pretty soon there'll be many people. Now, I think that what they'll do is put these on the market in a way that's beneficial initially, just to get it in your head. And then, of course, they can do more things with it. So, for example, if they say that they have found a way to help people who are bipolar, people who are suicidal, people who are known to be very angry and violent and rapists and so on, and they can predict that the guy is getting to some bad place, and they can have an alarm and call for help, or somebody who's going to have a heart attack, if they can predict. So I think they will come up with mental health solutions to very extreme problems, and everybody will approve it as something great, and it'll get in the door, get in the people's brains. And then the second wave of, I'm just anticipating how Elon Musk might think. So I'm saying the second wave will be entertainment, saying, okay, you know what? You can have this exciting experience, this fantasy. Now that it's proven for solving mental problems, you can also have a lot of fun. So it'll go in as entertainment. And then somebody will say that, okay, for maybe you plant this and you get free Netflix movies in your brain, and you don't even have to have a TV camera, you just watch it in your brain. So like that, I think people will get induced into having this installed, such that it'll become like a standard, and parents will have it installed when the moment the baby is born, as a kind of a normal thing, because you don't want your child left out. I think all of this, if it happens, could lead us into trouble.
Yeah, this is like the movie Matrix that has foreseen this thing. And of course, potentially these are possible. And that's why what we have to do, really, that's the important thing, because ultimately what can be done, what could be done, how soon it will be done, in 100 years, 200 years, whatever. But all this tells us we have to raise our consciousness now. As humans, we have to rise above the limitations of individuality, which is fine, but which should be based on universality. We have to use the knowledge of Veda and Vedanta and the technologies that the masters of the tradition have brought, such as Maharishi and the whole parampara, the whole teaching, that gives us actual technologies to be happy within, to be alert, to be awake, to be balanced, to be productive, to live a unity of life. And then we can control technology and use technology to our benefit rather than become a slave of technological progress.
Good, good. Can we have one more question also, if there is? Okay, so here it says, psychological indicators are scientific ways to, physiological indicators are scientific ways to measure effects of our experiences. Good way to imperfectly evaluate mental stated. I don't know what that means, but can it measure consciousness? How do you define consciousness? So this person is looking at it from a measuring of consciousness to kind of defining it.
Yeah, so if you know, physiological indicators can indicate, as we discussed, you know, this person is under stress. This, even now we can measure even the kind of thoughts you have. Under functional MRI, you can actually ask the person to think of something, and if they are thinking about, let's say, playing tennis, or they are thinking about studying, or they are thinking about driving a car, you can actually tell which are the thoughts that are happening, the kind of thoughts. It's not like fully what you think, but there are different categories of thinking that through physiological indicators you can detect that. In terms of consciousness, you can tell if a person is in deep sleep, you can tell if a person is dreaming, you can tell if a person is awake, and you can tell if a person is transcending. And there are, you know, in 1970, Dr. Keith Wallace did his PhD thesis at UCLA demonstrating that transcendental consciousness has its own physiological changes that are different from sleep, dream, and waking. And that is why it has been called a major state of consciousness, which is what we call restful alertness or hypometabolic alert state, which is something you don't get during deep sleep, during dream, or during waking. And therefore, yes, we can have measures from the physiology, and the more the techniques are possible, the more you can tell that a person is actually in this state of consciousness or that state of consciousness.
Good.
And if it advances more, maybe we can also detect cosmic consciousness and God consciousness and unity consciousness.
One more question. How about that? If there is. Okay. So it says, if effect implies existence, does your theory predict the behavior or nature of consciousness? I'm not sure I understand. If the effect implies existence, so we mentioned that consciousness has an effect and therefore it exists. So I'm not sure I understand. Do you want to take a shot at it?
Yeah, I define existence in the book very clearly as being the result of, or to exist, to be, appear as real, as being the result of three factors coming together. The knower, the knowing process, and the object coming together leads to an experience of existence of an object. Without the knower, the object does not exist. It does not really exist for that knower. It is still virtual. So consciousness is primary, and by analyzing the dynamics of consciousness, you can understand the processes that lead to manifestation. So you start with consciousness, and you can see like effects of cause and effect, action and reaction, karma, why do they come, how they come. And this paradigm that's presented in the book explains also such phenomena. Why, for example, there is karma, why there is action and reaction always balancing each other based on the paradigm that is being presented. So all of existence comes from consciousness. And so that is the starting point.
Excellent. So this could go on for a long time. Our time has run out, so I will have to close. But I want people to know that at the bottom of the social media, we are giving details on Tony Nader's book. You should buy it. I'll also plug my book, which is coming out in 2 weeks. It's also on consciousness. It's called The Battle for Consciousness Theory. The Battle for Consciousness Theory. You can go to my website, rajivmalhotra.com, and you can see the link there to buy. And also they'll put it up here. They'll put it up. So Dr. Nader, you have a copy of your book. You can show it to us. Great.
There is one copy here, but since you this
yes,
is
this is a wonderful. So actually very similar color schemes.
Yeah, it has also illustration.
Excellent. If you put up your cover, if you just put up your cover, the cover, it's very similar color schemes.
Yeah, amazing. And we could tell those who are watching that we didn't coordinate that.
I didn't even know. Okay. So this is good. I don't have a physical copy, but I'm told that yesterday some physical copies existed at the publishing house, and so I'm very keen to get my hands on it. So this has been wonderful. It's always a pleasure. Before closing, I want to say something about why I respect Maharishi so much and his whole organization. First of all, that's where I learned my transcendental meditation, which I continue practicing. I have had the honor and the pleasure of learning from many gurus, many kinds of techniques, but the TM is my foundation, which I start with. And then there are other things I learned, keep learning. So I'm very grateful to that, to Maharishi, because that's where I had my experiences of transcending. And then I could decide to take it further, study, get motivated. And eventually, as a result of many of my own experiences, I decided to give up the other life, the material life, and take a kind of a limited sannyas. I'm a family man, but it's a sannyas from money, sannyas from chasing money and ambition and those kind of things. So I could focus on doing my own sadhana. So I owe a large part of this to Maharishi, I have to say. I also want to tell people that with the help of Tony and his organization, I'm writing a book on Maharishi, on the unacknowledged debt that the world owes to him, which has not been properly appreciated. And so he's made have access to a lot of the archives, which we are going through. It'll take about a year to put this whole book together. So certain things we are finding, you will be interested to know. One is that Deepak Chopra worked there, worked with Maharishi, and he's always acknowledged it. But I think the general public doesn't know the extent to which he was involved and a lot of knowledge he got, which then he took out into the mainstream and made it very popular among Americans, among in a certain kind of people, in the very liberal Americans. He brought in this mind-body healing kind of a thing, and it's a Maharishi's ideas. Maharishi brought Ayurveda for the first time to the United States in a very big way. So he's also a pioneer of Ayurveda. People should know that. Another great icon who started out as a disciple of Maharishi was Ravi Shankar, now known as Sri Sri Ravi Shankar. So at that time, Ravi Shankar worked also in Maharishi's organization. And Maharishi, the book that profoundly affected me was authored by Maharishi. It was called Science of Being and Art of Living. Science of Being and Art of Living, a masterpiece. So Sri Sri took the second part of it, Art of Living, and started a big organization called Art of Living. So that phrase, even the name Art of Living, comes from Maharishi's book, Science of Being and Art of Living. People need to know that. So what he's done very successfully and made a big impact and helped lots of people is to take these ideas into the mainstream among Indian people. Because Maharishi was specializing among Westerners. This was his era. His era was before there was a big globalization of Indian diaspora and so on and so forth. So he wanted Westerners to know this. And Sri Sri took it back to India in a very big way. That's an amazing story. Yet another one is Herb Benson at Harvard took the idea of transcendental meditation and came up with a knockout, which is 100% the same thing, except he replaced the mantra with his own thing, and he called it the relaxation response and trademarked it and got tens of millions of dollars of grants and money from the US government and from various places to do all kinds of fancy research on what is actually TM. But he didn't want to acknowledge it. We wanted it to be his own. So I have gained access through the Harvard archive. I gained access to a few thousand pages of his notes and his documents, and that'll be part of my book also, because that's a huge unacknowledged debt that ought to come out. And then the fourth very large example is Thomas Keating, Father Keating, a Catholic, a Trappist monk. He learned transcendental meditation. He gave many lectures in the Maharishi University. He went and talked about it. He then started bringing his monks to learn transcendental meditation. And then he notices that, Catholicism doesn't have this. People have to leave the church and they're going somewhere else to learn. And maybe we should figure out a way that we can explain this in Christian terms and in biblical terms. And so he developed, along with a few other people like Wayne Teasdale and a few others, he developed and popularized what became known as Christian centering prayer, which is transcendental meditation modified. It's not the same thing, but it's modified kind of to fit into a biblical narrative. So these are just four of many examples of Maharishi's legacy that ought to be documented. But unfortunately, nobody has done justice to it. So I took it upon myself, and with that, I want to close the discussion. And Tony, any final comments from your side?
Thank you so much for all you're doing in terms of presenting the value and the source and the root of the knowledge, because in connecting with that source and respecting it, we have the full value of consciousness. And so it's time to really the world to realize the importance of consciousness, not only on a theoretical level, but there is technology of consciousness that can have very practical effects on changing individual life and social life. And it's very much needed now and actually for all time.
Thank you very much. And we'll have more conversations, I'm sure, in the future. Thank you so much.
Forward. Thank you. You're wonderful.
Thank you. All the best to you.